Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Scott M. Graves,
And,
self-styled liberal pundit and founder of SM Graves Associates.
and I'm Scott J. Graves, just along for the ride.
And you are listening to episode 4 of Scott's on the Rocks Politica. And, I'm just going to say right now, I'm not going to apologize for our opener. We're still trying to figure out, what we want to do for the opener. And that's probably obvious now to our listeners.
Yeah, it probably is.
It is Thursday, November 5th, 2020. And I just stopped just about 35 minutes ago listening to the president of the United States give a news press conference, and for those of you who might have listened to this, wow, was that something?
Yeah, I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. You were talking about it a little bit before we came on, but I didn't hear it.
It's I guess one perspective could be it's just more of the same on a little bit more energy behind it. But I mean, he literally, at least by the 13 or 14 minute mark, started to just, say that, there's widespread fraud and that he was hoping his supporters would do something about it, that there's been a lot of legal actions that they've had to take. He wasn't specific on who's had to take them, but one would assume that he means that his administration has had to take. It was pretty much a shit show, to say the least.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, sometimes he needs to be. Well, you can't corral the guy. He's the president of the United States. But I mean, the election took place a couple of days ago. Nobody knows if there was fraud or not. Although I've heard some stories about. I mean, you always hear these anecdotes about people finding votes or finding ballots or throwing away ballots and all this stuff. But for the president to come out and just say there's fraud, I mean, you got to be a little bit more responsible. You got to wait for because they might find fraud. I mean, they might not, or they might, but you have to let the process take its course. Although I do know about a couple of lawsuits or legal actions, and it was just to like one was in Pennsylvania because the Republicans in Pennsylvania claim that they weren't being allowed to watch the ballot counting because they're still counting votes in Pennsylvania. So it's
Right.
legal actions like that, and I think they've asked the Supreme Court to pick up the other case that the Supreme Court has granted on certiorari, the one that they wouldn't grant the stay. I think it was last Wednesday. They're asking the Supreme Court to pick that one back up. But it's just it's nothing. There's no legal actions against fraud or anything like that. It's just procedurally.
And in presidential elections in the past, we've seen there be various legal actions that are happening in the midst of a count. It's and regardless of what people have been saying in the last week and a half, this time period we're in right now is not unusual. It takes days post election day for votes to be counted and for there to be a certified, final result state to state. Really, in one sense, people shouldn't see anything like this as being unusual because we are a republic in which, states themselves are tasked with finalizing their ballots. And every state can kind of do within a spectrum of legalese what it wants. It's not a centralized system, in other words.
Right, and usually when it's not such a close race, what you just said is correct, but we don't really know what the individual states are doing because the decision's already been made. If for instance, last time Trump had like 306 electoral votes or 307, whatever it was. So we didn't really know what the individual states were doing to wrap everything up statewide because it was a foregone conclusion. But here it's so close. So here, though, you have two things. One, you had the massive amounts of mail-in votings, absentee voting. So that has never happened before. You get states inundated with this stuff. So that's never happened. Together with like an extremely close election. I mean, I think there's 6 states now that they're still gray. They're still on the board. They're still counting votes or not counting. So I agree with you in terms of like people looking at this going, oh my God, this is like chaos. It's not really chaos yet. But however, I will admit this though, with all the mail-ins in some of the states had changed the rules at the last minute, like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, there is a little bit of chaos and there is some room there for shenanigans going on. I'm not saying there is shenanigans going on, but there certainly is opportunity for that going on because it's never
Right.
been done before.
Well, because we haven't done this before. Generally speaking, I'm all for it. I mean, to me, what this has shown is that when working class people, that is to say, that term in the most broadest sense, people who work, when it is made easier for them and more flexible for them to vote, it turns out that they'll vote. I mean, maybe I'm a little too hopeful or naive. I would like to think in the future, regardless of whether there's a president like Trump versus somebody else. I'd like to think people are motivated to vote in these kind of numbers simply because given more ability to vote, whether or not they have to work on election day, they're going to show up to vote. You know what I mean? Now, that having been said, I do think that you just mentioned a part of it. The states have to be better prepared for the phenomenon of mail-in ballots, and this idea that you're going to get a large amount of them in, and they have to be counted on time, and and all of that kind of thing. And I don't agree with any situation where a voter is given a set of instructions and then later on down the road finds out that that some of those parameters would be changed. And that's not me saying that that's specifically happening here. I'm saying that in cases where they've tried to say, well, after a certain number of days, we're not going to count the ballots anymore. This is assuming that they need to be counted, just what you said, right? It's getting
Right.
down to every ballot.
Right.
I think that if we weren't in the age of Trump, I'd say that's perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with every election being right down to the last ballot. You know what I mean? There could
No,
be just many positive reasons for an election that's run that way as there are negative reasons in this case. In this case, a lot of people are feeling underwhelmed by the outcome simply because if you are of the persuasion that you feel like not only is Trump been a shit show, but he's really rabble-roused a whole bunch of racists and other people that we would prefer thinking are from a bygone era, that that the way that this has come down to the wire is like, oh my God, what do I think about my neighbors now? You know what I mean?
I don't know, how does racism come into it?
Racism comes into this because Donald Trump has roused racist sentiments in different
On this
parts of the
election?
country.
On this election?
Not in the election. No, I'm talking about the 4 years he's been president.
Oh, well, I don't agree with that. But let me go back to the election. So, but here, what do you think about this? So the way we've always voted, like in terms of like we have the secret ballot. You go to your polling booths, your voting booths. You hand somebody, or in Gardner, you actually put it in a machine, right? And the machine counts it, right? So they know exactly. So everything's like so controlled. It's always been so controlled. So there wasn't a lot of room for human intervention, because let's face it, humans are fallible and some humans are very partisan. And so if you say you had a bunch of Republicans working at a polling place, counting votes, after the election, right? Say there's 25 Republicans counting votes, just people that they chose, whoever the registrar of voters are in a particular place. And they're opening envelopes, and it introduces, do you not agree with me? It introduces the human element where shenanigans can go on. Whereas in the traditional way of doing it, there's really not a lot of room for shenanigans. No?
There is no doubt that in that particular case, there's no doubt that somebody, if they wanted to, they could just start throwing away ballots, right? The ballot is safe once it leaves the hand of somebody who's taken it out of an envelope and put it in a ballot box.
It's not.
As long as you filled it out correctly, right? So we have that problem. We've talked about doing early
But let
voting
me
like
stop
this
you for a second. So,
digitally, and
but what
there's
are they do?
problems with that too.
But what are they doing? Like, say they open the envelope, right, and they put it in a box. Then at some point, somebody's got to go, okay, this one's for Trump, and they're marking it down with a pen, or does that go in a machine? See, I don't know how
Well,
they do it.
my impression is that the ballots are taken out of the envelopes and they have to go directly into the machine. Why would they have to write down anything or record?
Yeah, I don't know. I
No,
guess
you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to, because that's the whole point of the process. You know that because I've now twice, done a mail-in. You have to fill out that ballot just like you do at the ballot
but say
day
you
of
have
the
a box.
election.
So say you're in that situation. You're somewhere in Arkansas, and there's a box of freaking votes, and so you got a couple plastic boxes on somebody's desk. And just say you're somebody that doesn't like Trump. You open up, so you're putting all the Trump. So you're opening it up. It's no more secret ballot. You're actually reading somebody's ballot. You throw it in a box, right? And then the voter's no longer there. See, in the traditional way of doing it, you're standing there. You're either putting your ballot in or somebody's watching you put your ballot in, right? But here the voters are gone and all these humans are by themselves. So that person could take a box of, say, Biden votes or Trump votes and just like get rid of them. Nobody's watching these people, right? Who's watching them? The voter's
There's
gone.
there's like I said, there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, if we go back 100 years, right? Bunch of
Yeah.
white guys standing around the ballot box, and a black man comes in to be the one Republican vote in some small town in Mississippi, right? There's never been a 100% safe, quote unquote, way to vote. It gets better, and there's better processes than others.
But we got it pretty good.
Maybe what we're really talking about is somebody has to introduce innovation to the process of mail-in voting, because I still say anytime you make it easier for legal citizens to vote, I mean, generally speaking, I'm all for it, as long
Me
as you
too.
can reduce. I don't think you can ever 100% get rid of any possibility that there's fraud, but you can reduce it down to the least amount. You know what I mean? And can technology be used in this case? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not up enough on the type of technology that would be used.
Yeah, it's almost
Now,
something that
a
they
lot
would
of
have to implement, like at the post office or something. A ballot comes in, and and somebody at the post office is dedicated. They're already underwater.
Well, and I wonder too if you could design it, the actual physical design of the ballots themselves. Like you could create a ballot that it's not so much you're making it harder for people to look at it, but you're making it easier for people not to have to look at it, to be fed into something. You know what I mean? Like the actual information on it is entirely sealed, but the outer part, you simply take it out one type of envelope and boom, it goes right into a machine. And you're right, it could happen at the Postal Service,
It
where
seems
it's
like that
where
would
it's
happen.
essentially going into a modernized ballot box once it goes there. It
Right.
minimizes the amount of contact anybody has with it. I don't know, that's interesting. Maybe we're
But
inventing something while we're sitting here talking.
but I agree with you. Any way we can come up with that's going to increase the voting participation, because I think was Gardner's like 72% of the people voted or something. Was the county?
I think it was exactly 71.1% of the voting block, which when you consider that in any state or municipal election, what's the most we ever, I mean, in municipal elections, it's usually like, if we're lucky, if it's 21% or 25%.
It's like 25, 27, which is that was a subject I think we might be talking about, but that's incredible to me. How ridiculous that is.
Right.
How insane that is. That 73% or 71% of the people will go out for a say a presidential and state rep election, but when
Well,
your
it's
city
like,
council or mayor election, you're going to get 1/4. Where that election
what it
really
is,
matters.
the more localized the election, the percentage of eligible voters goes down that actually bother to vote, which is astounding, because the reality is your state and municipal, particularly municipal elections, if you want to talk about the political block that matters the most to your daily life,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
your select board, it's your city council and your mayor, it's your city manager. It is, and yet people on a good day, you know, cities are getting 18, 20, 25, 27% of the eligible voters to vote. You
It,
know, it was gratifying being a part of the process this time around and watching in the state rep race here in the second Worcester district that instead of, you know, 5 or 6,000 people voting, I believe we had close to 20,000 people that voted, or at least it was like 13 to 15,000 people, something like that.
yeah, I don't know what the last, because it was piggybacked with a presidential election. I don't know what the last one was when that was piggybacked with a presidential election in terms of percentages. Maybe it was close, but it seemed like this one was especially high. But going back
Yeah.
to the local elections, I think people just don't. I think it just doesn't dawn on people. Maybe they don't look at it that way. That when you have a local election, that should be the one where you see 75% of the votes, because that has to do with your real estate taxes. It has to do with whether your roads are getting paved, what your water rates are, what your sewer rates are, how much you're paying for trash. That, everything coming out of your pocket on a regular basis, like your real estate taxes, in the money actually coming out of your pocket, that's determined at the local level.
And
Somebody's
not
on
just the
city
fact,
council not doing anything.
not just the dollar amount, i.e., you get to vote for people who are either going to approve or disapprove your ideas for a budget, but also it's one of allocation.
Yes.
If your city or town is going to be spending money on economic development, you should know, and you have a direct result on who's going to represent you in getting those projects done.
Exactly.
You'll see what's going on with any particular community's renewable energy portfolio. You'll see what's happening for your local schools. You know, are we going to
Yeah,
build
schools.
are we going to build a building or not? If we are going to build that building, how many years is it going to take us to pay off the bond? You know, and you vote for people who have either technical knowledge that's going to get you to the right place, or just simply agree with the way you feel. You know, it's a question of
Right.
allocation of funds and stuff.
Yes.
And yet we see people. This is you're right. There's going to be a whole other episode where we kind of really delve into this and hopefully get some, you know, some citizens to come on at the same time too and explain to us why they do vote, and then we'll get some people who are willing to talk about the fact that they don't vote. You know. I want to bring up one more thing at the national level before we focus all our time on these local elections, and that is because we're trying in each episode in little snippets to give people perspective. I did some digging for us, and this is by no means a complete look at the electoral college system in this country, but since we spend so much time, it seems, both in person and in social media these days, talking about the electoral college system, its merits, its demerits. I found a couple of interesting facts for people to understand. So the idea of this electoral college system, of course, as you know, has been relatively fluid, right? And there's a few highlights to that. One is that and starting to mess with the electoral college system started really early. So I want to point out a couple of things. In the election of 1800, this was the election between it would have either put John Adams in for a second term or a new president, and the first president from the Democratic Republican Party of that time, which is more or less, you could kind of say, a conservative party. The party alignments, their ideologies were not aligned with our Democrat and Republican parties today, but you get the drift.
Just
So
a little
Tom
bit.
Jefferson.
Just in one sense, and that was whether you want a strong federal government or more a state.
Right. And that's right. You're 100%
we still
correct.
have that. I think the Democrats are kind of known now for wanting. Go ahead.
That's right. And plantation owners like Tom Jefferson, generally speaking, although there were exceptions like James Madison, did not want a strong central government. They wanted to keep more power in the hands of the states. Tom Jefferson particularly believed that with most of the newly forming industrial power in the North and all the capital that came with that the North would very easily overwhelm the land wealthy and labor wealthy but cash poor South, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plantation system. So anyways, in the election of 1800, Tom Jefferson understood that he had an increased chance of winning if Virginia, and Virginia's electorates now I'm talking about, voted as a block. Okay, the framers of our Constitution, when it was ratified in 1787, created an electoral college whose entirety was based on districts, right? So electorates voted along the lines of their districts. So each electorate represented a district within his or her, well, all then his state, and then the district's vote in the popular vote determined that electorate's vote. And so with 1800, the change, they changed that. So it was what some people today call an all or nothing proposition. That so enraged Alexander Hamilton and James Madison that they argued for a constitutional amendment following the Adams loss to Jefferson. This whole system changed slightly again, or actually not slightly, majorly in 1929. Now, the reasons for that were urbanization in this country, which had been going on for close to a century at that point, was also having a dramatic effect on political demographics, right? So generally speaking, things were becoming more democratic because of urbanization. And Republicans who controlled the legislature at that time realized following the 1920 census, they did this after the 1920 census. They refused to reapportion as anticipated by the results of the census. So they took the information from the 1920 census and basically they said, we're not going to reapportion districts. And the result of that was, for one, they capped the House of Representatives at 435 seats. And what this did very quickly over a short period of time is, over time, the districts tripled in size and gave an advantage to small states in the Electoral College. And so I point this out because I want people to understand that our system of the Electoral College has been fluid and that we've changed it. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. People, depending on what side you're on, you're going to see that differently. But like a lot of other things in the history of the United States, it's a fluid process. Nothing's ever really been etched in stone. Things that we think are etched in stone, we think so because they've been that way for a long period of time, according to our lifetimes. And it is true now, it's been close to a century, and we really haven't messed too much with the Electoral College system, although I think state to state, some of that might have been done just before I was born in the late 60s, early 70s, but I'm not sure because I wasn't here, and you were a kid, so I don't even, you're sure. But I think that I just wanted to make that point for people that they understand that, going back all the way to the third election in the United States, that the Electoral College system has been looked at in different ways by different people.
See, I didn't really know that. All I know is that, especially the 1920 thing, I wasn't aware of, because the Electoral College obviously is contained in the Constitution.
Correct.
Article 2, I think it is. Article 2. And then the 12th Amendment changed it because they had that tie when Jefferson and Aaron Burr had the tie, because back then you voted for president and vice president. And that time
That's
around,
right.
the Republicans voted for Burr, and Burr and Jefferson were both Republicans. I think they called them Democratic Republicans. I forget.
It were Democratic Republicans. That's correct. Yeah,
Democratic
versus
Republicans. So, anyways, it's in. So it's not that fluid because it's in the Constitution. So I think what it is now, though, is I think the electors are the amount of representatives you have plus your 2 senators, so it's equal to that. It's equal.
You mean you're meaning the determination of how many electorates per state?
Per state, you get like
I
Massachusetts will get the number of their congressmen or women,
Yeah.
plus the 2 senators. That's how many electors they get. But it's all or nothing.
You're
But it's
correct. You're correct. Well, you're correct, and so
it's all or nothing. So Massachusetts voted for Biden. So all the electors have to go to wherever they go. I don't even know where they go, but the electors they go somewhere, and the electors have to vote unless you have the faithless elector, which Supreme Court just had a case on that this year, I think. So they have to. So the number of electors, which equals the amount of our Congress people and the 2 senators, they go and they vote for Biden.
And the way that gets manipulated if it does. An example of that is the one I just gave, right? In 1929, 9 years after that census, well, sort of like from 1920 to 1929, the results of the census came back. Republicans who were in charge at the time of the who were in charge of the country at the time realized that if they put a limit on the House, that was since changed, and that would alter the way things are reapportioned, so that they would continue to have somewhat of an advantage, or at the very least, Democrats would have a disadvantage, comparatively speaking, because at that time, I should have given more context. I'll give it right now. Urbanization meant more of the population, because we're really dealing with this today, right? People get all kinds of inactivity because, well, we've got these few, states on the coast determining the elections. Well, elections, of course, are determined by people, not by counties and not by landmass. And for 150 plus years, people have been moving to the cities, and overwhelmingly that means, especially now, they're moving to the coasts of the country. Those people in the urban areas are overwhelmingly Democratic relative to other parts of the country that are more rural, which overwhelmingly are Republican or conservative. So, that hopefully I was long-winded, but I've explained, how things were done in the 20s. I think it's like anything else, you know what I mean? Like you are correct. It's the Electoral College is part of the Constitution. It's a fundamental part of our government. But like a lot of other parts of the Constitution, I think that the framers decided to give a little bit of levity to the future. This, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why the Constitution has lasted as long as it has, because it can be interpreted for the times. It can be, it allows us enough levity to kind of interpret and reinterpret again. And
Well, we can
anyways,
get it. We'll eventually get into the difference between a living constitution, which is what you're talking about, and an originalist approach at the Constitution, which is what is the original meaning of the Constitution. But back to the Electoral College, the fluid part of it is that every 10 years we do a census, so that the amount of the state's representatives in the House of Representatives will change based on your population. Like I think New York lost a seat or two because their population, because people are jumping off that ship. They're jumping out of California too. And that's why you see some of these red states turning blue now, because the people that have ruined the paradise, like California, the lefties that ruin California and New York, they run to the good states.
God.
They run to the good states. No, this is
treating
true.
an entire block of people like they're a cancer.
They can't wait to get out of the states that they ruined, and they go to the states that they haven't ruined yet, like Arizona, Maine, New Hampshire.
Vermont.
So anyway,
I've heard this a lot in Vermont.
But here's the other thing about what you said about, well, the Electoral College is based on people, and it should be based on popular vote. But I did a little bit of math. Okay, California has 40 million people living in it, right? So if we did,
sixth largest economy, by the way, in the world.
It's ridiculous, okay? And that's one of the reasons why people are jumping off that ship. But let's look at your point. So if you wanted to base the Electoral College on popular vote, for instance, California would determine every election, and I'm going to show you why. If you add Massachusetts, if you add all of New England, New York, and New Jersey, that would equal California. So if California alone would wipe out the votes, the popular votes of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Vermont, New York, and New Jersey. I mean, that's insane.
I want to understand where you're coming from on this. So because I really want to understand. That's why.
Well, let me put it in a different way.
My question would be, what's the what? Say it again.
Let me put it a different way. So your argument is one person, one vote. So it should be popular vote. One person, one vote. Truly democratic, which we don't have a democratic system, by the way. We have a constitutional republic. We are ruled by.
that's
constitution.
not that actually that's not my argument. My argument is not one person, one vote. My argument is proper representation, right? I think we can have relatively good representation with the Electoral College, okay? So, and I also understand the premise of as we've changed the Electoral College over 230 years, that that you have a percentage of the population in what they would have called at that time a district, right? And that those people vote in the popular vote. And then the electorate, the electorate is supposed, for that district, is supposed to vote the way that the popular vote went
Yeah,
in his district, right? In his or her district.
yeah.
I think that's perfectly fine. That's representative government.
So what don't you like about the Electoral College?
I didn't say I specifically had a problem with it. My entire premise for bringing it up tonight was to give a little bit of history to people and for folks to understand that the process that's created the current electoral college system has been a fluid process from almost from the very beginning, 1800.
But I thought you
When,
said some of the smaller states have just as much power because of the Electoral College as like
I
a
believe,
hugely
well,
populated state.
I think, let me be clear then. I don't have a problem with the way things work, more or less, because I don't, like, some people make the argument that, like, well, you got all these counties in the country that don't get the equal representation compared to the cities. It's people who vote, not counties, not geography, right? So I don't have a problem if the people, if assuming our system as we've described it is working, if the people of California ultimately then, as you said, get a say over many states here in the Northeast, simply because those people spoke, right? They spoke through their ballot and their electorate voted according to the way that
Right.
their electoral
I
districts
I
voted.
think it works great right now. And I don't hear anybody
The
bitching because
problem
they
is
live
we
in
keep
some,
running idiots.
huh?
The
I don't
problem
hear
is we
people.
keep running people who aren't the strongest candidates.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to do it because, like California, for instance, they have the most electoral votes. It's a huge state to get. That's why, I mean, if you get California, New York, and Massachusetts, you pretty much won the presidency every single time. So, like, people who are conservative might hating the Electoral College. I don't know, because basically California, Massachusetts, New York, right out of the Pennsylvania, usually, right out of the picture right away, you know. But there's no other way to do it. Um, I don't think. But anyways, because
Anyway,
California
that's
gets more
a
electoral.
conversation. We'll have to brush up since only you are the lawyer. This is
Well,
going to take me a long time. So maybe
it's
we'll do
really
an
not
entire
illegal.
episode about the electoral college system, but I'm going to have to do a lot of research because it's not my area of expertise.
I don't know much about it either, to be honest with you.